The reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone has been studied probably as much by sociobiologists and social psychologists as biologists. Aside from the real challenges that are associated with the coexistence of wolves and people in an area like this, there are a whole host of ideological factors that play into all the well-known controversies. Fortunately, I was going to say, and so that's what Doug's going to talk about today, but I won't do that. Fortunately for us, I think, our role here is really to focus on the current state of the science about wolves and provide regular updates on those things as they come. Science, as all of you know, is dynamic. So our guest today is uniquely qualified both in expertise, experience, and in temperament to provide that information. He studied wolves for now more than 30 years. Boy, it's hard to believe. You're aging with all of us, including Yellowstone. I think he's aged more in the last few years and probably much. But and including his studies, of course, have included the Yellowstone population from really before the reintroduction in preparing for that since 1995. He's a Wolf Project leader for Yellowstone National Park. He's a senior author of the award-winning book Decade of the Wolf, author of scores of scientific papers and popular articles as well on wolves and beavers. Some of you may not know that work, but he really did some groundbreaking work on beavers as well and dispersal mechanisms and that sort of thing. And he's widely recognized as the world's leading authority on Yellowstone wolf biology and ecology. You've probably seen him in National Geographic, BBC documentaries, other media interviews. What you may not know is he's an avid canoeist, hunter, and all-around outdoorsman. So please help me welcome today Dr. Douglas Smith.
Well, I wasn't nervous to give this talk, but after that introduction, I am a little bit now. Very generous. I appreciate that, Chuck, and always delighted to come to Cody to talk about wolves. People are enthusiastic and passionate about the wolf issue, so it's good to be here. And as Chuck mentions, I've been here before to talk about it, and I do want to kind of outline what I'm going to talk about because there's a lot of wolf issues around Cody. When I first came, there were only wolves in the park, and that's where wolves were reintroduced, and they've since spread out and filled in the distance between Cody and the park. And that population kind of functions differently. It is connected to the park population. There's other research, some of it that's just finishing up now, that the University of Wyoming led, that Wyoming Game and Fish was involved with, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was involved with. But those studies are, we communicate and collaborate with those people, but they're slightly different. I'm not going to talk anything at all about livestock depredations. It's not true that there's no livestock in Yellowstone. There's tens to hundreds of horses each night at this time of year in Yellowstone. So we do have wolf-livestock interactions. There's not much to report there. In general, that's not an issue. That is an issue, as you know, outside of national park settings. I am going to talk a little bit about the hunting season that's proposed for this fall. First, wolves have to be delisted in Wyoming. That does appear to be on track for a proposal going out later this month, early September. But hunting is more important for outside the park populations than it is inside the park, although there has been some discussions and interactions about packs that we share, packs that go in Yellowstone and packs that go outside, and I will talk briefly about that as well. I'm going to talk a lot about the Yellowstone wolf population. I'm going to talk a fair bit about, which is, besides livestock, I think one of the other hot button issues is wolf impacts on elk. And that might be more involved and more of a passionate discussion than even wolf-livestock interactions. I don't want to gloss over any detail with wolves, but in general, livestock killing wolves are not tolerated, period. That's end of the story. Whereas everybody knew wolves were going to prey on elk. That was not a secret. That's what they're going to do. And so discussing that issue is more involved. It's not so black and white. It's many shades of gray. And I'll tell you maybe a punchline at the beginning is that my approach to wolf management is a moderate position. And that means myself, my agency, are pro-regulated wolf hunting. I think they need it. I think it increases tolerance of having wolves around when you can control problem wolves and you can have a harvest on them. But that doesn't mean I think that wolves should be hunted equally everywhere. I definitely think it's a turn up, turn down process. Some places they need to be lightly harvested, other areas they need to be heavily harvested. Some places like Yellowstone Park on your doorstep, they won't be harvested. I think that mosaic of hunting pressure is a good thing, and certainly this includes problem wolves. So you will not get from me, and in a lot of ways I can't because of my position, take an extreme position. But I will defend wolves on the other hand too. And the reason I will do that is because I think sometimes they get caught in the middle of debates they don't belong to be caught up in. And they're like any other animal, really. We know a lot about them. We should be able to live with them, manage them, etc. So maybe that's my talk in a nutshell. And I'll explore each of those issues that I said I would. And I'll leave the ones out that I said I wouldn't get into. Now, I'm going to follow Chuck's lead. And I did not ask him to give the introduction that he did. Believe me, I would never ask for that. But the sociological idea behind wolves. This is Yellowstone Park in the early days. That's actually a coyote. But you get the idea. You know, for thousands of years, hundreds of years, that has been the view of wolves. We kill them. The only good wolf is a dead wolf. Wolf recovery now has come about because of a change in human attitudes. Plain and simple. You folks, as Americans, stood up, changed your minds. There's an evolving view of all of wildlife. Part of that is an evolving view of predators. Wolves lead the list of antipathy towards predators. Those views changed. They even changed in Wyoming, Montana, Idaho. They've definitely changed across America. When we do surveys in the park asking about wolves, it's 70 to 80% support. Prior to wolf reintroduction, I'm not familiar with one that's been done since, but prior to wolf reintroduction, in Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, it was 50-50 pro-anti-wolf. That was not the case 30, 40 years ago. So this attitude towards wolves prevailed. That changed. That's why we've got wolves now today. That's very, very important. A change in human attitudes. How human attitudes are changing in other aspects of wildlife management, other aspects of in the environment, I cannot predict so well. So, because I don't have a lot of time, but I do think history is important. I think context is important. This is a brief Yellowstone wolf history. I think everybody here should be proud. You're all Americans, I presume. A lot of you are Wyomingites, that our best idea has been national parks. It truly is. There's a special by Ken Burns about that, America's best idea. I'm proud of that. I'm proud to work for Yellowstone Park. And Yellowstone Park is the first national park in the world. It's a great idea. Wolves were present. The initial park policy, like the previous slide, was to get rid of them. To get rid of all predators. Wolves, coyotes, foxes, bobcats, lynx, wolverines. They're a predator, we killed them. I left out bears because personalities matter. And there were some early administrators in Yellowstone's history who were charismatic and influential, and they didn't want bears killed. They liked them for some quirky reason. They were preserved, and you know that story. It went on to be the dumps, the feeding, people holding out food outside of cars, and that was a different story. High injury rate, high fatality rate, that was phased out. So the bear story is different in terms of predators. But the other predators, and left out cougars, wolves led the list of being killed. So the last wolf was killed in 1926. We went through a period of absence, no wolves in the park. That's not to say there weren't transients moving through, but undoubtedly there was not a wolf population in the park. Attitudes changed. There was a long period, it was about 20 years, with the establishment of the Endangered Species Act in 1973. Wolves were listed in 1974. And it was a 20-year process to bring wolves back to Yellowstone and central Idaho because of this change in public attitudes. That had an EIS involved, that had a lot of research involved, looking at the suitability of Yellowstone, public attitudes, et cetera, et cetera. We brought them back. We went to Canada in 95. Alberta got 14. Went to British Columbia in 1996, got 17. We got 10 wolves in northwest Montana. We did the reintroduction. I'll tell you why I'm calling 2010 the end of phase one. In many ways that's arbitrary, but I have a population graph coming up that I'll just let you eyeball, and so you'll understand why I'm calling this the end of phase one for wolf reintroduction in Yellowstone. But everything in Yellowstone's big theater. That's the Secretary of the Interior, that's the Director of the Fish and Wildlife Service. You throw in wolves and it's national news. A friend of mine was in China the day we brought wolves into Yellowstone, and it's on the news in China. So it's been a big deal ever since. And this is the population graph. This is how the wolves have performed the first 16, 17 years. The graphic is split into three groups. The tallest line is the park population total, and that peaked in 2003 at 174 wolves in 14 packs. Interesting, the next year, 2004, we had slightly fewer wolves, but the number of packs grew to 16. So that was our peak population level. Since then, I realized this was that I'm sorry to get ahead of myself. The dark blue is the northern part of the park. That's a famous area of Yellowstone, and it's defined by the winter range of the largest elk herd in the park, which is the northern Yellowstone elk herd. And that area is called the Northern Range. And that elk herd has been studied and debated for over 100 years. The area in the park for that range is about 1,000 kilometers squared. There's 500 more kilometers squared outside the park that comprise their entire winter range. But the rest of Yellowstone, until the last 4 or 5 years, had fewer wolves than 10% of the area of Yellowstone. If we want to round off Yellowstone, it's about 9,000 kilometers squared, actually 8,991. 1,000 of that's on the Northern Range. So a lot of wolves were packing in on that northern area because of the available elk. Fewer in the rest of the park. And notice recently, the decline that's occurred has mostly been northern wolves. The wolves in the interior have held their population. But you can see how I've kind of decided that we're at the end of phase one now. We had a population eruption, that's clear. We have a little bit blip in 2007, and since then the population's been declining and kind of stabilizing at around, these are rough figures, 100 wolves in 10 packs. Dramatic declines on the Northern Range. I think that's going to continue. I think over the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to be consistently below 100 wolves. Probably lose another pack or two. And that will be closer to the long-term equilibrium that we see for wolves in Yellowstone. So kind of an overshoot, and now coming down, and I use this word carefully because it's much abused in ecology, but coming into some kind of balance. Okay, it's not going to be wildly fluctuating like it was before. It's going to be fluctuating, always fluctuating, but more less dramatic. This is another way of looking at it. Many people try and understand the psyche of a wolf. That's what many of the debates about. You know, they got a psyche of a killer. They got a psyche of a traveler. They got a psyche of a social animal. Well, those are three very important components to their psyche. But their territoriality is also very, very important. Most mammals live on home ranges, which are loosely defined and broadly overlapping with other conspecifics. Wolves are territorial. That means exclusive use of land. That doesn't mean other wolf packs don't try and cheat. It's like you and some of our laws. You do it, but you don't if the cop's around. You do it and you hope you don't get caught. Wolves trespass, and they'll do it because they're hungry and they're going into the other pack's territories looking for prey. And if they get caught, they might get killed, at the very least chased out. So you see some overlap there. But in general, packs stick to their own territory and they defend them. Another way of looking at this, here is the graphic that I just showed you. Same categories, northern population, interior population, total population, but I threw in another very important factor that I didn't even think would be important in the early years, and that's disease. Each one of those CDV pointers is canine distemper virus. We've had 3 outbreaks. 3 years, when we caught pups in the winter, we pulled their blood and we saw that they were exposed to distemper. Parvovirus is a different story. Essentially, every wolf we catch every year, and pups are the most important because they're a clean slate, and if you catch them in the winter, you basically get what they've been exposed to for their previous 8 or 9 months of their life. And what you see there is what they've been exposed to, and they survived it. They didn't die from it. And essentially, all of them have parvovirus. So we don't know what parvovirus does, to be blunt. We do know what CDV, distemper, does. Pups die. Those years you see CDV, pup mortality on the northern part of the park is 70-80%. They die in great numbers. One year we only had 4 pups across the entire northern range. And I wanted to catch them to pull their blood to see if they've been, got to be a disease year. Got so few pups. So disease has been very important in the functioning of this population. But a key point, look each of the 2 first outbreaks. There was a rebound in wolves immediately the next year. Probably what we call compensatory survival. You had really bad pup survival. The next year you have really good. In 08, you don't get that. And you have an outbreak in 08, and you do not have a bounce back of the wolf population the next year, and it stays flat. We don't know. Our data is accumulating, but we think that is a food-driven decline. In other words, they are coming into equilibrium with the available food supply now. No rebound after the 3rd outbreak of canine distemper. And then, of course, around 07, we started getting mange creeping in. And now most of the wolves in the northern range, some of the wolves in the interior have mange. And we've got an intensive study going on that. I can't report it to you because mange is kind of hard to summarize. Sometimes you die, sometimes you don't. But what's becoming apparent is it doesn't go away. It seems to wax and wane. Some years it's really bad. Wolves show it visibly. They've lost a lot of hair. Then 2-3 years later, they got it, but they're not losing half their hair. So it seems once it comes, it seems to fluctuate in severity. This is a bad case. That wolf on the upper panel compared to the lower panel is a year apart. That wolf obviously died from mange. Not all of them do, but if you get a case that bad, you will. Here are some other examples of it, less severe. The bottom right panel, basically it's a mite that burrows into your skin and causes you to itch almost uncontrollably. If you've ever watched a wolf with mange, they can hardly walk 2 steps without itching. But if you can itch with your foot, you'll lick it. And that's it. That wolf couldn't reach that spot with its foot, so it would lick it. So what happened is this wolf here did not die of mange. This is a few years ago. Here's a dead wolf. And one thing that we do when we get to dead wolves is we necropsy them as fully as we can, but we always look at their marrow fat. And undoubtedly, most of you in here are biological aficionados of some type. Certainly, probably know a lot about elk. And one thing you do when you look at a dead elk, maybe not when you hunt it, but when you find a dead one in the environment or a predator kill, is you look at the condition of their bone marrow. And you look at how much fat is in the bone marrow, because a large constituent of bone marrow is fat. And it's the last fat supply in your body when you are nutritionally stressed. You have body fat, organ fat, and marrow fat. And if you are hungry, you start to use them in that order that I mentioned. And so the last fat to be used is marrow fat. And if you're 70% marrow fat and above as a wolf, 80% for an elk, and I have some slides on this later, you're in good shape. This wolf here was about 30% marrow fat. It starved to death. We're starting to get more of that. That's why I'm telling you the lack of population response after the last CDV outbreak is linked to food, because 10 years ago, our wolves were fat. None of them had poor marrow fat when we necropsied them because they were dead. They did not die of starvation. Times were good for wolves. That's changing. I'll get to this in a minute, but we have a leaner, meaner elk herd. And that translates to some wolves starving. That translates to fewer pups, smaller littles, fewer pups surviving, and that's what's happening this year in Yellowstone. The wolves are coming into equilibrium with their prey. When wolves are food stressed, they do this: kill each other. We call it intraspecific strife. That wolf on the ground in the middle was a wolf that was caught trespassing onto another wolf's territory. And that happens all the time in wolf populations. There's background trespasses all the time. Wolves just do that. But it increases when food is limiting. When you're hungry, you travel more, and when you travel more, you bump into neighboring packs more, and more of you die. Interestingly, in 2008, an outbreak of distemper was the largest year of wolf-wolf killing of any year we've had. 12 wolves died. It peaked right at the same time. So disease is important, but also there's a shift going on with wolf condition and prey. End of phase 1. This is what it looks like. We've tried to get to every dead wolf. We try to leave as much as we can. It's a national park. That's my policy. I also believe that. Let the body go back into the system, but we compromise, and we do take the skull, and we do take that femur bone, so we can get those data. So every skull we've collected is at the Heritage Center in Gardner, Montana. Not quite the same level of the Draper Museum in terms of museums, but not bad. So you could go there and look at this skull, but you see those holes in the middle of the palate there, like a WWF wrestler. You get the right hold on an opponent, and you'll win the fight. We don't see that many wolf fights, but apparently, if these are two wolf jaws, if you can get that bite right there, and if you've ever seen it, the wolf that gets that hold will not let go of that bite. And boy, going through the skull collection, you can see those bite marks on the upper part of that palate. And that probably, and I don't know this for sure, led to this animal's death. So they will compete with each other, they will fight with each other when food gets to be limiting. So this is a little technical, but I got to show it to you, because as Chuck mentioned, I studied beavers. Me and my partners caught over 2,000 beavers live from the early 80s to early 90s. I was doing wolf and beaver research at that time, and I wished I knew more then to replicate this data set with beavers. But this basically tells you why wolves have the number of pups they do and why they survive at the rate they do. And so I want, because this is a little technical, to impress upon you a couple things. Pups born and pups survive do not function together. They're separate. And in general, although these data don't exactly tell that story, with wolves, they tend to have stable litters. Litters every year, not always, similar sized litters, around 5, although that fluctuates too. But the survival is what can vary widely year to year. So this is born. I'll go through it quickly. Upper left, age. It seems to peak middle of their life. Upper right, weight. The bigger you are, the more pups you have. Makes sense. Pack size seems to peak at middle-sized packs, 8. Look closely at all of these, because the next graphic does not tell the same story. And then population size, density dependent. I don't want to lecture you about ecology today, but if there's any pillar in ecology, it's density dependence. The more you have, the worse you do, essentially. Low population sizes, the population has better performance. Here's survived. It's not quite upper left, not quite as big a peak in the middle years, but a rapid decline for older females. The body weight thing still holds. The bottom left doesn't hold at all. Peak pups born was pack sizes of 8. Here, it keeps going up, although there is an inflection at about 3 wolves, where survival goes up rapidly and then levels out. The more wolves you get when you're a small pack, survival goes up a lot for each additional wolf. Then it slows down, but then keeps going up. Larger packs have better pup survival. Very different than born, and then again you see density dependence in terms of survival. So pups born and survive are not functioning tightly together. And the survival really is the key piece of the pie for wolves. Great fluctuations year to year. Disease is obviously a factor as well. That's not on here, but I already talked about that. I want to talk a little bit too about Yellowstone Park packs versus, say, packs that would live in the North Fork or the Crandall or Sunlight Basin. Those packs run into humans a lot, so there's a lot higher human mortality. In Yellowstone, there's almost no human mortality, so these different wolf packs function differently. For one, pack size of wolves in Yellowstone Park, on average, is always higher than pack sizes for wolves outside the park. Now, there's a range of pack sizes in and out of the park, but in general, packs in Yellowstone Park are bigger. And so what you get are packs in the upper panel. You got every kind of wolf in the pack. You got pups of the year, you got yearlings, you got 2-year-olds, you got 3-year-olds. You might even have a 4-year-old tucked in there, and then you got the breeding pair. The pack below, you can see the 2 wolves on the left are adults, the 2 wolves on the right are pups, and that's called a simple pack. That's my nomenclature, and that's what you get a lot of times when you have high human exploitation. It's oftentimes not that simple. You might have a yearling in there or a 2-year-old in there, but those packs are dealing with high human-caused mortality, so they have a different structure. In general, this is not true across the board. I'm sure all of you can find examples of the upper pack that lives outside of Yellowstone Park, so I'm generalizing. What does that mean? Well, it means, for one, that's a male wolf on the left, a female wolf on the right. The male wolf is 20% larger. It takes wolves about 4 to 5 years to reach this maximum size. Now look at how fast it goes up. They reach their maximum size within about a year or 2. But when they keep growing, there's a big disparity between male wolves and female wolves. Most wolves, again, I'm generalizing, don't make it to 4 to 5 outside of Yellowstone Park. They're usually dead by then. And 70 to 80% of the cause of death of wolves outside of Yellowstone, and this is a study we did, it's over 1,500 radio-collared wolves from 1982 to 2010. The cause of death is 70 to 80% human-caused. So if you're a wolf that lives outside of Yellowstone Park, you're likely going to die at the hands of a human being, whether that's legal control, hunting, poaching, car strike. You're probably going to die from a human being, and you're probably not going to live to 4 or 5 years of age. That's a fact of life between wolves in Yellowstone and out. So when you make it to 4 or 5, there's big differences between you, males and females. And what that is these are all young males or females, and they're the wolves who pick out the elk to kill because they're fast. So they're better runners. And at the end of my program, I have some pictures of helicopter darting wolves. And I come from Midwest wolf experience, Michigan and Minnesota. And I didn't chase wolves around on a helicopter there. You can't, it's too forested. But one of the first things I learned chasing wolves around a helicopter is big males ain't got no gas. They give up fast, they're slow, They turn around, look at the helicopter. I ain't ever met a female wolf that did not think she could outrun that helicopter. Not one. And man, they will if you don't get right on them. You got to pick your female out and get on her early and go after her and nobody but her, because she'll outrun you. And that translates, the light went on for me, of how they hunt elk. Because there's no big male here. This is another chase. No big male there either. All those wolves are females, sleek and fast. They cornered that elk. That elk they chased about 2 miles. He had the breath pulsating out of his mouth. He's on the edge of a cliff. You can see the cliff down there low. I thought they had him. Females turned and walked away. That elk lived. There are 2 big males in that pack, right in that 4 to 5 year old range, big hulking monsters. They laid under a tree for the whole hunt. I have no idea. I do very poorly predicting your guys' behavior in this room. When you walk out of this room, I have no idea what you're all going to go do. I have no idea why those wolves did not participate in the hunt. But the females here, this is speculation, they did their job. They got that elk tired, cornered, and I think if one of those big males had been there, they would have moved in for the attack, and then that elk would have got nervous, he's tired, and he would have started running again. That is the preferred position wolves want prey in. They don't like standing prey at all. They're a little bit cowardly about that. If you're that big, 750-pound bull elk, that's about what he weighs in December, that's what this time of year was, and you're a 100-pound wolf on average, you throw males and females together, exclude pups, you're about 100 pounds. We do have some examples of bigger ones, but roughly that's the average. That's not a fair fight. 750 versus 100. The wolves want that elk running. When you run, they're always going to give chase. If you're tired, that's going to favor the wolves. They would have had a kill there. Big males didn't participate. Females walked away. The elk lived. So big difference in hunting styles that's due to body size. Here's a cow elk that got cornered on a cliff. Now this is summer, and what do you think? Did that cow elk live or die? She lived. For one, she was out of options where to go, so all she had left was to stand her ground against that wolf, and a mean cow elk will usually win against a wolf. I've seen it many times. Many, many times. If you are a nasty cow, prime age, they don't want to mess with you. Which brings up a very important point about wolf hunting behavior. They search for vulnerabilities. I know that if some of you treated me to beers tonight in downtown Cody, I would get into this conversation in the bar that wolves kill any elk they want. That is not true. On average, underlined 3 times, on average, they kill elk with a problem. Problems come in many forms. That doesn't mean they don't kill healthy elk, but they got to work a lot harder at it, and they got to risk injury or death doing that. So if they're doing that a lot, the wolf population will decline. Wolves live on vulnerable animals. It's a fact. The studies done here, right out back of Cody by Arthur Middleton, University of Wyoming, Wyoming Game and Fish, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service found the same thing. That's what they make their living on. That doesn't mean they don't kill healthy animals, but that's what they make their living on. And they won't perform well as a population if all you got are healthy elk. This elk lived. Here's an elk that didn't. The big males came in later. You can see that 8-year-old male. But I want to bore in a little bit on wolf-elk relations. Very quickly, this is what they eat. EW is early winter. LW is late winter, spring, summer. This is mostly an elk economy. I'll talk a little bit about it, although bison are increasing in importance. Very little time to talk about this, but I've been in Yellowstone since 1994, and my first year there were 500 bison on the northern range of Yellowstone. Now there's over 2,000 consistently year-round. So we're starting to wonder about competition between bison and elk because one bison consumes as much as 2 to 3 elk. So have we swapped bison for elk? That could be a factor. Wolves typically don't kill a lot of those bison, but they all die. And they're not allowed out of the park, by the way. I think you know that. I won't get into that issue. So they die somewhere in the park, and that's a lot of meat. Bull, 2,000 pounds. cow 1,200. So the bison story is slightly different. I'll only talk a little bit about that. So this is elk, and this is the kinds of elk they kill. So this is what wolves make their living on. Old elk, calf elk, very few prime age elk. That's the smallest box there, although only slightly more old elk. But they're really making their living off of bulls and calves. And that shifts year to year. But old elk are also very important. This is a picture of a 20-plus-year-old elk. Average age, still to this day, and I can't believe these data, and they've been absolutely flat for over 10 years, average age of a wolf-killed cow elk is still around 14 or 15, which shocks me because the elk population in the Northern Range, I'll get to this in a minute, has declined by 70%. Yet the age of cows that wolves kill has not changed, which suggests to me they still got to get these vulnerable cows. Those are the ones they got. Now look, here, they do kill the prime age elk too, but at a very, very low rate, and the variability is low. So prime age elk are still tough for them to make a living off of. This is how frequently they kill. This has got nothing to do with what they kill. Split up by early winter, the purple bars, and late winter, the red. The point I'd like to make to you for this is no winter's the same. And that's been something that wolf biologists have known for a long time. Winter severity is a very key factor in terms of wolf ecology. In general, the harder the winter, the better the wolves do. You get 2 back-to-back hard winters, and that's really tough on a prey population. A back-to-back scenario of hard winters. I was worried about this winter because the winter of 2010, 2011 was the worst winter we'd had in 50, 60 years. I saw elk in Lamar Valley neck deep in snow, walking around. I'm a biologist my whole life. I wondered why that elk was even there. What are you doing? A wolf comes up to you, you're dead. Healthy or not. I mean, that's a vulnerability when you're in neck deep snow. And then, so every winter's different, and then notice too that every late winter, the red, they're killing at a higher rate than early winter. So weather, year, climate are all big players in this predator-prey relationship. I'm trying to impress this on you. It is not about just wolves eat elk, period, end of story. There's a lot of factors that play into this. Here's a look. This is a deep snow winter. The wolves work hard in general in deep snow. The elk are gone. They're seeking less snow at lower elevation. If you stick around, and it tends to be old cows and bulls that stick around, old cows without calves, if a wolf finds you in this situation, that elk's plowing the snow for those wolves to run in, you're going to die. So weather plays in, as does body size, as does age, as does behavior. And so I'm covering all those aspects. Same story here. Deep snow, look, that's chest deep. Some people call that belly deep on the elk. That elk got killed. Wolves will kill at a higher rate under these environmental conditions. Here's a winter 2005. This is early March. This is actually March 5th, 2005. This particular area in Yellowstone should have a foot or two of snow at that time of year. It had none. It was a drought winter. I know what you guys know what that's like. You live in Cody. You deal with the same kind of weather patterns we do. And those wolves pursued that elk for over a mile. They made a couple attempts to get tooth into flesh. I watched it from the airplane. Never did that, and the elk ran away. It's a pedestal bull. I don't know if you can see that. The antlers have dropped. It's about the time of year they do it, although more towards later March a little bit. I think if there's a foot or two of snow there, that late winter crunchy, crusty snow, because these wolves almost got this elk. I mean, they were right there the whole time. If there had been a foot or two of that nasty snow, I think they would have got it. So I think this was a weather-mediated interaction. So this is a look in quantitative terms. The first graphic is 8 years of data, early winter only. The bottom graphic is 2 years, early winter only, and you can see a shift. Those first 8 years, early winter, they went after calves. Those 2 years there, they went after bulls. it's switched. So there's only 2 or 3 things I really want you to carry with you when you leave the room. One is wolves do not kill any elk they want on average. And the second is 80% of wildlife studies are 3 years or less, because they're mostly graduate student driven. So truly, long-term studies are rare, and they're worth every penny. Because here, if you're a grad student during the first period or the second period, you conclude completely different things. Things change in nature. Chuck used the word dynamic in his introductory comments. I could not agree with him more. Very, very important, this long-term switch. Why did it switch? This is another graphic. This is looking at a continuous series of data. The best science is the simplest science, by far. If you can explain something with less verbosity, with less explanation, with fewer numbers, the better. That's one reason I really like this data set. This tells a story. This is the amount of bone marrow that elk have in early and late winter in our wolf-killed sample. The blue are the calves, and the red are the adults. What's key about this is every year, late winter, elk are not in good shape. Now, this is a wolf-killed sample. We're not going out and shooting. I've thought about proposing that to the Park Service, because to get a random sample of elk late winter, I'm not sure they'd go for it. But I would truly like to know if all of the elk are like this, or just the wolf-killed elk. But they're all in bad shape late winter. But more interestingly to me, it's the early winter. Every peak there is an early winter value. And what's very, very interesting to me, and might help explain this increase in bulls as of late, is 80% is considered good bone marrow. 40 to 80%, you probably are going to survive, but you're not in good shape. Below 40%, you're starving to death. That's less than 2% body fat. 9-10% body fat is considered good. Up to 16, 17, 18% is considered excellent. So if you look at that graph, what's interesting to me is through time, early in the year, the dot is getting to be below 80%. So adult elk, now the calves are staying a little bit higher, but through time there's a sliding down of adult elk condition going into winter. That's when they should be in their best shape, because the rest of winter is staring you in the face, and you've got to be in great shape. And we think there's something going on with climate. Now, Arthur Middleton, who I've mentioned before, did his work at University of Wyoming. He really specialized in this relationship. He's just coming out with his work. I've only been able to hear him speak about it. I haven't read about it. But this is a very, very, and so I'm not going to discuss it at length, but there's a very important aspect of the wolf-elk relationship on this side of Yellowstone. So what we think is going on, climate change affects the forage, which affects the condition of elk. We think it's primarily bulls, and that affects wolf predation. This is a model. I know as soon as I say model, half of you are going to get up and leave the room. All models are wrong, some are instructive. But this is a word model of what we think is going on, and Arthur Middleton has got much more data on this than we do and in much greater detail. But something's going on with this relationship. I know because a few years ago, as Chuck said, I've spoken in Cody before, Wyoming Game and Fish guys sometimes come and they came up to me after and said, you know, in a good year, an acre of summer range has about 800 to 1,100 pounds of forage. In a bad year, that's around 400. So that probably plays into that big old bull's condition. And remember, that big old bull has to deal with the September rut. And if you don't go into that rut, and elk biologists tell me they may not eat for a couple weeks, if you don't go in that absolute tippy-top shape, you're going to get spit out of that rut. And you're going to be what? The V word? Vulnerable. And wolves pick up on it. That's the story we're trying to piece together. Arthur, his advisor Matt Kaufman, Wyoming Game and Fish was involved, Mike Jimenez from Fish and Wildlife Service. That's the story they're trying to piece together. things out there are changing. Average July temperatures are 8 degrees warmer than they were, I forget what Arthur said, about 20 years ago. Huge impact on this relationship. Very important, can't emphasize it enough. So here's the seasonal cycle that we've got for wolves. Just to show it to you quickly, on the right is most important, that's how much wolves eat. On the left, it's how often they kill. They kill slightly more in the summer because they're eating smaller stuff. Deer move back into the park, elk calves. But the time of year when wolves are doing their worst is the flip side of when elk are doing their worst. June, July, even into early winter, wolf food consumption is down. Late winter, it's at its peak. Why? The V word. Elk are most vulnerable. That's the seasonal cycle for wolves. I'd love to spend more time on this graphic because the amount of money and time we spent piecing that together is really incredible. It tells a simple story, but remember, simple stories are the best. But not many people have that picture of the year-round consumption of wolf prey. So here is the debate. Here's a debate around Cody. Here's a debate around Jackson. Here's a debate around every place wolves show up. Our elk numbers aren't the same. Why? Well, the bottom line and the disappointing fact is every system's different. A friend of mine studied wolves in the Yukon Territory for 20 years. He killed over 850 wolves. He radio collared over 350. The point being, I want to find out what wolves do to moose, caribou, and Dall sheep populations. And you know what he found out? Sometimes they're the factor, sometimes they're not. If predation is your limiting factor, killing wolves and bears, by the way, because it's usually multiple predators, the Alaskans have pioneered that route. Killing wolves alone probably ain't going to get your moose populations to come back because there's no bigger calf predator than a bear, black or grizzly. And up there, most of them are grizzly, but they do have black. And so if predation is your limiting factor, killing bears and wolves will get you more of your huntable wildlife. If they're not, like in the southwest Yukon, where weather determines your carrying capacity, killing wolves made no difference at all. So unfortunately, every system is different. Here in Yellowstone, we went, this is this northern herd, I'm sticking to one herd, there's 7 elk herds in Yellowstone, just trying to talk about one. We went from 20,000 plus elk down to about 5,000 counted. Now I actually think it's high, or that's low, because we're having big debates about elk sightability. And on average, you only see 70% of them. In a bad year, you only see 50% of them. And our counted elk last year were around somewhere in the mid 4,000s, but I think it's up more towards 6 or 7. But this is the raw counts. They've declined. There's no question they've declined, sightability aside. And everybody says, tell me what's different. Wolves are what's different. But what we've had is cougars restored themselves in the late 1980s. Remember, they were wiped out from Yellowstone too. They were killed off like wolves. We didn't reintroduce them. They came back, and they started coming back late 1980s. Bears have increased. Bears have always been there, and people always say that, but they've increased. We know grizzlies have. We don't know about black bears, but they're there too. Yellowstone is as predator-rich right now as it's been in 100 years. Remember the Park Service administrators, remember my early park history graphic? They came in and they killed all the predators off. And as I said, that can, not always, but that certainly can increase your prey population when you have no predation. And that's essentially what happened, and the rangers took over that, because as you know, all of you live close to Yellowstone, from the 1930s to the late 1960s, rangers were killing and shipping elk out of the park. There weren't any predators. And then we restored them, and we allowed them to increase, and so we have a multiple predator system. I would argue, and I don't have the data, but I think I could find it, Yellowstone's the most predator-rich place you will find in North America. And we don't hunt them. And that's what our policy is. I'm proud of it, and that's what Americans want. We don't hunt elk, deer, pronghorn, bighorn sheep, goats, wolves, grizzlies, black bears, cougars, coyotes, bobcats, lynx in Yellowstone. We ain't. If you want to see an uprising across America, propose hunting in Yellowstone. So it's a predator-rich environment. I think you would expect fewer elk. But that is probably what Yellowstone was like pre-European human influences. There's big debates about what Native Americans did, but if the Alaskans and the Yukoners are right, who are 20 to 30 years ahead of studying predator-prey systems than we are, some of these systems, when you have an intact guild of predators, your prey population is below carrying capacity. Does everybody know what I mean by carrying capacity? That means if you have no predators, your elk, your moose, your caribou, your sheep, whatever they may be, is at the level the food can support. Bing, right there. And these systems in the north and in the Rocky Mountains probably evolved over millions. Yes, I said millions, not thousands. Millions of years for these animals to be below carrying capacity because that provided life and sustenance for predators. But that difference between not eating everything out there on the landscape provided habitat for a whole suite of other species. A whole suite of other species. That's called biodiversity. And that's probably how it worked. Now, what's the bad news about that? Because that sounds like a very holistic vision. That's a great vision for wildlife management. The trouble with that probably does not happen, and I have some slides coming up about this in a minute. That probably does not happen unless you have natural densities of predators, which is a level that's above what most people can tolerate living with. So where are you going to get that? Probably only in places like Yellowstone Park. That's probably the only place you're going to see these systems look like they used to look several hundred years ago. Having wolves back on the landscape, cougars back with them, grizzly bears back with them, does not automatically cause these things to kick into place because they are not at their natural densities. I read it in the paper all the time. Wolves show up, we're going to get ecosystem restoration. Ain't that simple. You've got to have an unexploited population of carnivores to get those kind of changes to occur. This is a big debate. So here's the summary graphic. My mentor in life with wolves did this graphic, so I think it's great not only because he did it, because it's also simple. And remember, the best science is the science that can be explained simply. The bottom axis is the number of predator species. They weren't even looking at density, just how many different species of predators were present. This is Canada and the Yukon, Canada and Alaska. And on the y-axis, the vertical axis, is the density of the primary prey. In this case, I believe it was just moose or caribou. And as you add predator species, their density of prey goes down. And this is held up through scrutiny through time. So this is the north. This includes humans. We're a predator, remember. 4 species of predators. Well, geez, what's Yellowstone? Wolves, cougars, black bears, grizzly bears. Most of these systems would only have one bear, either or, black or grizzly. Humans. You could even throw coyotes in there because they'll go after elk calves. So you got 6 predators. This one's got 4. So I do think a little bit of the blame on wolves for the decline of the northern Yellowstone elk herd is misplaced. Do wolves have a role in that? Oh, yeah. Do other predators? Oh, yeah. Is that probably what Yellowstone was like before we tampered with it? Probably. There's one more factor, and I won't get into this because it's political. The state and the park couldn't agree on elk management. But they said openly there were too many elk in that herd. 20,000 plus is overpopulation. And when I got to Yellowstone in 1994, that was the criticism I had. I couldn't let my ranch be like this. It's overgrazed, it's overbrowsed, it's dominated by elk, and they're ruining everything. There are books about that. Elk ruined Yellowstone. It won the book of the year for the Wildlife Society. Too many elk ruined the park. It's essentially what it said. I'm shocked that in my short career, 18 years in Yellowstone, now the elk are going to go extinct. It's just a little play. But the state definitely thought there were too many elk, so they were managing the herd for fewer elk. We cannot leave that out. Some years they shot 2,000 cows. A lot of years they averaged, many years back to back, they averaged 1,000. That's a fact. There were many factors that conspired to lower the number of elk in Yellowstone. I do not want to say wolves had no part of that. But I also want to say it's not just because of wolves. As I said, the bison story is slightly different. Bison are a lot bigger than elk. Bison tend not to run when approached by wolves. That befuddles the the wolves. So the battles like this can go on for hours. The longest battle between wolves and a bison we saw was 9 hours. So it's a big deal. This is the winter of 2011, and this is a bison. You can see the wolves in front. You can see the pool of blood below that's soaked into the snow. Here's another look. There's a pack of wolves down below. They chased that bison off that cornice. Can you see the track down that cornice? They had to wait this guy out several days before they could kill him. When I took these pictures, I was circling in the plane, and as I circled, I flew over these bison. Look at those guys. I mean, last winter, not this, the winter before, the winter die-off of elk and bison was tremendous, all due to winter severity. And this winter was a tough one for guess who? Wolves. Bingo, you guys got it. Because if you had a problem as an elk or a bison last winter, you died. Only the fittest and strongest lived through last winter. So everybody this winter was in great shape. And what is that? That for a wolf. So that's one reason we think the wolf population right now is struggling. Here's a picture I took last week. I like to keep my talks fresh, mainly for my sake. Dead bison, the rut is picking up. You see that bison probably died fighting with another, that's a bull. There's a grizzly on it with a wolf hoping to get in. A second or two after I clicked that shot, the bear chased the wolf off. A little bit blurred, but bears tend to control the carcass. I'm going to go quickly because I'm running out of time, but this is essentially what I've been talking about the last 10 minutes. This is one thing that's really been debated about Yellowstone. What does it mean having wolves back? We've had this resurgence. I'm looking for a picture. It didn't come up. I'm sorry. It's going to come up in 3 or 4. But we didn't have wolves for about 70 years. We've got them back, and what does that mean? Well, everybody I've met so far agrees. I think even the folks at Cody who live with wolves would agree that Yellowstone, Cody area, it's a very different place with wolves compared to without. Everybody agrees on that, but the details we want to debate. And essentially what we're saying is wolves affect elk, and if they affect elk, they affect the vegetation. And you can affect the elk in 2 different ways. You can kill them, or you can change the way they think. Now, I know that's a stretch to say an elk's thinking, but I think they do. And Arthur Middleton's done a great job in evaluating how often wolves come in contact with elk, once every 9 days. And so he cited, and so does his advisor, with there have not been many behavioral effects of wolves on elk. And that the main effects have been that there's fewer elk. And as I said, there's fewer elk due to the predator guild and the management scheme that the game agencies have employed. And that fewer has translated to greater vegetation. And that, in effect, is the best supported story for this trophic cascade. And remember back a few minutes, I said this is probably going to only happen where you get natural carnivore densities. So I'll flick through these next slides quickly, but conceptually, this is a picture model. This is the northern part of Yellowstone in the 20s and 30s. You didn't have the top predators. You did have bears, but it's only one predator, and they were reduced. So you didn't have them, so you had suppressed, you had lots of herbivores. They're out there eating plants. We don't know what the songbirds were, but I'm presuming low. We know the beavers were low. I've worked on that. And we know the willow and the aspen were suppressed because that's why they started shipping elk out in 1932, killing elk. 75,000 elk between 1932 and 1968 were killed or shipped out of Yellowstone. So that's what the park looked like then. Here we have a change. All the carnivores are restored. The elk are down. The bison are up. Probably not as, susceptible to wolf predation as our wolves or as our elk. Songbirds, we know are up. We published a study on that in ecological applications. And we know the willow has come back. And I talked to an aspen ecologist who's in Yellowstone this week sampling his aspen stands, and he's saying the response to aspen now is dramatic, but not on all his plots. And so I don't want to get into what that means. It could be a behavioral mechanism that Matt Kaufman and Arthur Middleton are not agreeing with, or it could be site characteristics are important, or a little bit of both. And this is the slide I was looking for. That's a pre and post wolf. That's Lamar Valley. I drove through there this morning, and this has happened. And people are wondering why. And it probably does have something to do with what I'm talking about. And the technical term for this is a trophic cascade. And it's a holy grail in ecology. You know, this means how are what we see out the window of the Draper Museum, why is it like that? And the two prevailing theories are top-down, predators control prey, and prey controls plants, or it's bottom-up. It has all to do with nutrition and how well the plants are doing that feeds back up through the chain, and the predators are merely taking advantage of the herbivores who are taking advantage of the plants. And many, many studies are looking to disentangle this, and as you'd expect, because science is frustrating, the answers are always different, but probably it's never really one or the other, but they're both fluctuating in importance all the time. But one thing I do know, because that's what I did my PhD on, was beavers. And I've done 11 aerial surveys of beavers in Yellowstone since I started. There were some surveys done before I started doing the aerial surveys, but they were not done on a complete park-wide basis. And they have come back in many areas. And that's what beavers do. I'm not going to show you the data because you're probably tired of my data by now. But they increase biodiversity as well by making habitats available. A monotypical lodgepole stand has got very little life in it. And if you've got miles and miles of lodgepole, you got miles and miles of low biodiversity. But if you break that landscape up through beaver damming or forest fires or clear cuts or whatever thing you do to break that landscape up and make it a mosaic instead of just one thing, you get more life. Beavers do that in spades because if you bring water into the question as well, just bring water in anywhere and life goes up. So beavers are creating habitat, and they responded to the willow, and we think the willow responded to the elk, and we think wolves have something to do with that elk story, as do other factors. Not that simple as I just described, but that's the basic idea. And we're starting to get more of these guys. This is a Wilson's warbler, and they're obligate willow nesters. In other words, they don't nest anywhere else than willows, and our bird surveys are starting to pick up an increase of them as well as willow flycatchers, all within the last 10 years. So these things, as we piece the story together, are slow to emerge, but a different picture of Yellowstone is coming through. It is a different place. Is that all due to wolves? No. Is that partly due to wolves? Yes. Scavengers are another one. Ravens, vultures of the north. This is a scene in Hayden Valley. Wolves killed it. There they are, the bystanders, and there's the bear on the kill. There's ravens all around waiting to get on. They'll even bring their cubs in, although that's rare. And that female's only got one cub, and it's probably because she's a careless mom, because wolves will kill cubs. Other things will kill them. Big male bears will kill cubs. So you come to a carcass, you're probably going to encounter wolves or big male bears. You could lose your cub, but nonetheless, and we've worked with the grizzly bear people on this, in years of poor white bark pine production, the number of bears on wolf-killed carcasses in September and October increases. So looks like when bears can't find the food they look for, they will go to wolf kills and steal carcasses. And interestingly, in Yellowstone, grizzly bears win 80% of the time over contested carcasses. In Banff, it's 50-50. And we don't know why that's different. But I think it's because, one, the bears in Yellowstone are bigger, so a slightly different problem for a wolf. And in Yellowstone or in Banff, the equilibrium between predator and prey is more in place. So in the early years, it was easier for the wolves to go off and kill another elk rather than fight a bear off. I think times are changing now, and those win-loss rates are going to change. This is a slide. I really wish I could take credit for it, but one of my guys took this 2 weeks ago. But this is Pelican Valley in the summer. That's a bull elk the wolves killed, and look who's got it. Bears got it. I mean, I don't have time. I'm running out of space here, but there's 7-8 wolves, 7-8 bears on that thing. Pelican Valley in summer, you go in there, be careful. Golden Eagle, Chuck Preston, senior curator of this museum, has done pioneering work on golden eagles. But in the wintertime, most wolf carcasses have bald and golden eagles using them. It could be an important food source for eagle nesting, at least goldens. And so, we do have management problems in Yellowstone. I got to make a race to the end here, but I see those cars chasing the wolves down Yellowstone, and I go, that's a national park. I know we're supposed to protect the wildlife, so we do have our headaches. Yellowstone's probably the best place in the world to view wolves. I had to plow through a wolf-caused traffic jam this morning to get here on time. And of course, my temptation was to stop. The guys on the radio were saying why I wasn't, and I'll pull over. I told Chuck I would not be late, so I was trying to get here. But this is a great place in the world to watch wolves. Wintertime, too. It's probably the most exposed wolf population in the world to humans. So that means it has a different set of problems for us, is managing the non-hunting wolf-human interface. That was earlier this year. So people are actually stalking these animals. They want to get close to the wolf, and we have regulations in place that you cannot approach a wolf or a bear closer than 100 yards. And it's up to you to maintain that distance. So if the animal gets closer to you, you have to back off. And you can see these last few slides how that, like I said, wolf territoriality, they'll abuse the rules if they can. Well, here's another example of humans abusing the rules. So we have to manage this interface. This is a colleague of mine. I know him well. We correspond. And like many things in life, we disagree pointedly. He thinks wolves are dangerous. And the reason why there have been so few wolf attacks in North America, keep in mind, cougars and bears attack people every year. And through 2000, in North America, there have been fewer than 20 attacks by wolves on people. That's a published paper. And since then, unfortunately, there's probably been 2 fatalities. But that is extremely low rate for a carnivore, where bears and cougars are doing it every year. And he thinks that's because people are shooting at wolves routinely. And it causes them to be fearful of people. And as soon as you stop doing that, you're going to have problems. So we take this discussion very seriously, but I, in fact, do not believe that's the case. I believe wolves become dangerous to people when they become food conditioned, like bears. Every day in Yellowstone Park, there's someone as far as from me to Chuck from a bear in the park, and they don't get mauled. As soon as that bear gets food, then people get injured, people get killed. And I believe it's the same for wolves. So the key is not that wolves are inherently dangerous, not that habituated wolves are inherently dangerous. Just go to Lamar Valley. But we will haze those wolves. We are sending that message to wolves: you cannot approach people. But you got to do it at the teachable moment. But when they get food conditioned, we feel they become a human safety threat, and we've killed 2. We've killed 2 wolves, one last fall and one 2007, because they got food conditioned and they're approaching people. That was dangerous. So I do disagree with my colleague. We have a mutual friend who we hold in great admiration, which kind of pulls us together, but we have disagreed sharply over how dangerous wolves are. I'm going to go through these very quickly. I forgot they're in it, but I thought for you guys you'd want to know about it. Hunting is very much on the horizon for wolves. This is in Wyoming. And that's probably going to happen in Wyoming. It already happened in Idaho and Montana. They want to lower the wolf populations. Again, no issues with regulated wildlife management. But we have got boundary issues. We've got packs that go in and out of Yellowstone that are hunted. And most of our experiences with Montana, Montana has worked with us, and so the packs that go out of Yellowstone on the north boundary, the state has instituted a lower quota for those hunting districts. The first year they did not. They harvested almost half of one pack, and since that time, Montana has lowered that number to only 3 wolves being allowed to be shot right up against the north boundary of Yellowstone. Because this is the first hunting season for Wyoming and us, we are beginning to talk about our common interests. And the pack of interest is a Delta pack, which ranges actually further outside of Yellowstone than do the northern packs. And it's also probably outside of people seeing wolves in Lamar Valley every day. I get more reports about the Delta pack than any other pack. And it's not because people see them, it's because people go to the southeast corner of Yellowstone Park and they camp and they hear wolves howling. And for most people, they think this is the quintessential wilderness experience. I'm in the most remote area of the lower 48, and I'm sitting by my tent at night and I hear wolves howl. And so for me and my colleagues who work in a national park, we value that kind of experience. I think Wyoming values that pack because they're not a livestock killing pack. And they're pretty deep in the wilderness. And so Wyoming will be held, and Yellowstone Park will count towards this, to a certain minimum wolf population based on pack integrity. So keeping this pack in place has common interests to both us and the state of Wyoming. This is the Delta pack that I'm talking about. I gotta go fast, but this is their locations. That's just when we go fly. I get worried when I look at it and think, geez, I was in the plane for half of those green dots, and maybe I'm flying too much as I grow older here. And then that's what their territory, so you can see that a good chunk outside, but that's only part of the story because I didn't tell you, when we don't get them at the park line, we usually quit flying because, as many of you know, living in Wyoming, that wilderness, that Bridger Teton, that Shoshone country, east and south of the park is gigantic. And we don't fly them out there because we could spend a lot of our time on a winter day, and the weather turns bad in the winter. So we put collars on them, and we did this in cooperation with Wyoming Game and Fish that locate the wolves for you by communicating with satellites and storing the data on the collar, and that's what their territory looks like when you do that. So you can see South Fork of the Shoshone is a big area that those wolves have gone into. And so this is truly a transboundary pack, Wyoming and Yellowstone Park. So we are initiating discussions with Wyoming Game and Fish, and they've been going very well. And we're talking about monitoring this pack together because of our shared interests. So this is how we do it. Almost everything I've shown you here hinges on catching and marking wolves. And we've caught 433 wolves in Yellowstone Park since 1995. The only study that's caught more is Dave Meach's Minnesota study. He started in 1968, and he's got slightly greater than 700. So in 18 years, we're quickly approaching his mark, not that we're trying to exceed it, but this is how it's done. I came with no experience in darting wolves, so I had to go to Alaska to learn how to do it. This is Mountain Creek, which is just north of the thoroughfare. This is the Delta Pack. This is 2 years ago. That's what I see looking out the window or the door of the helicopter. The door is off. That's another shot. There's my gun barrel. And that's about when I pulled the trigger. And this was just one of those rare cases. It's not necessarily good, but we were chasing a wolf and it turned towards the road, started running right at a group of people. And a photographer took this photo and sent it to me, but that's what it looks like. And the value of this is, unlike leg-hold trapping, is you can pick the wolf you want. Leg-hold trapping is an unbiased, whoever steps in the trap gets caught, and you get a lot of pups because they're naive and they're unskilled at avoiding traps. But the gray wolf there is the white wolf who lives in Hayden Valley, and she's the most sought-after photographic subject for wolves in the park. So I told the pilot, who's local, although he wouldn't call Gray Bull and Whirlwind local, but that's where he comes out of, I said, avoid her. Go after that male. And I'm oftentimes accused of many, many things, by the way. I won't get my list, but one of them is, don't you think this is harassment to wildlife? Doing this with a helicopter. And while that black wolf, who by the way is the alpha male, was down, he wasn't even down all the way. He was staggering from the effects of the drug. The number 2 male in the pack, the beta male, went to that female and started breeding with her. And so I use that as evidence that chasing that female with the helicopter for a few minutes must not have been too terribly stressful for her, as she was able to engage in that activity within minutes of the helicopter pulling away. But But I don't know if you can see, there's a radio collar between that wolf's legs. I darted that wolf a couple months before this photo was taken. And so this is one of the those collars that communicate with satellites. A standard wolf collar costs $350. This is the type that locates them for you. You download it or you get the collar back. And the wolf chewed the collar, or a packmate chewed the collar off. So always disappointing. But this is the single largest wolf we've caught in Yellowstone out of those 433. It weighed 148 pounds. I hear all the time that people see wolves that weigh 180, 190 pounds. I cannot verify that statement, and I travel Yellowstone with a scale. And this is the single largest wolf. Keep in mind, weighing wolves is notoriously inaccurate because they can hold up to 22 pounds of meat in their stomach. This wolf did not have any meat in its stomach because oftentimes from the drug they'll vomit, and it was vomiting stomach bile. So usually when they are vomiting and if they have meat in their stomach, chunks of meat come up. So this is the creature of all the controversy, and this wolf struck me because I've handled hundreds of wolves. I've personally darted probably 250, and sometimes I can get a little brazen, and it's just another wolf. But I looked at this wolf in the heart of Yellowstone, in the heart of the best wilderness in the lower 48, at least defined by furthest from the road. And I thought to myself, that is the critter all this debate's about. And certainly as a hunter, I'm a recreational hunter, not a subsistence hunter, this is very poignant for me looking at this animal. Because it probably is true, if you kill more wolves, you will get more elk. But that's basically agriculture. I mean, you spray weeds, you get more corn. Is that what I want my hunting experience to come down to? Basically game for, or livestock for hunters. But I think that there's a sweet spot, a moderate path that we can take between having places and animals like this, between continuing our recreational interest in the harvest of wildlife. There's another look at them. I've been the one up here talking. I've had a lot of help doing this study. This is our technicians. The group is always changing, but they deserve a lot of credit. I don't want you to think that this has been a solo endeavor. So a lot of those people have been in the park for a number of years, including our pilot. He's been flying Yellowstone since 1952. He's got 65,000 hours in a Super Cub. That's 7 years continuous flying, and he is the most enthusiastic, passionate. I mean, he probably wouldn't want me giving out his age, but he's well above 70, and he's still flying that Super Cub. And as enthusiastic about it, I swear, as a 16-year-old. And every wolf study worth their salt has a solid bush pilot. You just cannot do it without a bush pilot. I went over, I apologize. I don't know if there's time for questions. If there's not, because I did, I apologize. I always forget. I have some annual reports from 2010. If any of you want, it's up to Chuck if there's time for questions or not. Thank you very much.